Learn to ask and answer questions in Spanish. And here you have 3 words that your teacher gives you. In this case, you have vives, donde, tú, and then you have question mark in the beginning and at the end because you're supposed to ask a question. So as you know, in Spanish, we have question mark in the beginning. So that's the first thing you want to start with. The next thing you want to look at is the words that you are given. What is the question word there? In this case, the question word here is donde. And you know that donde means where. So you put donde. Now you have 2 other words here. You have tú, which means you, the pronoun, and then you have vives, which is the conjugation of the verb vivir, which is to live, and for you live. So you know that the rule when asking questions, the conjugated verb comes before the subject pronoun or the name. So in this case, you have to go with vives next. So donde vives, and then the subject pronoun, tú, and then the question mark at the end. So donde vives tú? It wouldn't be correct if you put donde tú vives, because if you put donde tú vives, you are now following the rule that in Spanish, when you're asking questions, the conjugated verb comes first and then the subject pronoun. So donde vives tú is where do you live? Now use these words to answer the question. You have Colombia, yo, and vivo. So you know Colombia is a place, is a country. Yo is the subject pronoun for I, and is in, and vivo is the conjugation of the verb vivir for yo, I live. So the rule when you're answering questions in Spanish is you start with the subject pronoun. So in this case, you have yo, which is the subject pronoun, I. And then the next thing you have to find is your verb, which is vivo. Yo vivo, I live, yo vivo. And then en, which is in. And then Colombia. Yo vivo en Colombia. So you have your subject pronoun, then the conjugated verb, and then the rest of the sentence. Yo vivo en Colombia. Now in this example, you are giving a name instead of a subject pronoun. So the name you are given here is César, which is a male name in Spanish. You still have a question. You have to form a question. You have question mark in the beginning. So you start with that. And then you start with the question word, which is donde. And then you have to go with the conjugated verb. And then you would go with the name or the subject pronoun. But in this case, it gives you a name. So it would be donde vive César? Where does César live? That's how you would ask that question. Question word first, conjugated verb, and then the name or the subject pronoun. In this case, you got a name. To answer that question, you are given these words. So you have to go with the name first or the subject pronoun. In this case, you have a name, César, and then the conjugated verb, which is vive, César vive, and then the rest of the sentence, en Colombia. César vive en Colombia. César lives in Colombia. And here you have a few words. You have estudiantes, which means students. You have hay, which means there is or there are. You have en, which is in. La, which is the. Clase, which is class. and cuántos, which is a question word that means how many or how much. So again, let's start with the question mark in the beginning. And now the next thing you have to find out is what is the question word here. So one easy thing is that all question words in Spanish have accent marks, and you now know the question words in Spanish, so you have to put cuántos here. So cuántos, how many, and then how many, cuántos estudiantes, how many students, cuántos estudiantes. There are, en la clase. ¿Cuántos estudiantes hay en la clase? And then the end of question mark. So how many students hay en la clase? So every time you want to use this word I, which is there is or there are, this is how you would use it when you're asking a question. Now you have these words to answer the question of ¿cuántos estudiantes hay en la clase? And the words you are given are estudiantes, clase, en, la, hay, 22. So you have students, class, in, there is or there are, and 22. So, ¿cuántos estudiantes hay en la clase? So, there is or there are, hay 22, 22, estudiantes, students, en la clase. Hay 22 estudiantes en la clase. In here you have the words no comes, por qué, la, en, cafetería, and then the two question marks. So the question word here is por qué. As you see, it has the accent mark. Por qué means why. So we're going to start with the question word. But first, let's put the question word mark in the beginning. And then por qué, which is why. Por qué. And then in here we have a no, which means don't or doesn't. So that always comes before the verb in a question and in a statement. Just like in English, you always put that before the verb. So, ¿por qué no? The next word here that needs to be here is the verb. Well, cafetería is not a verb. It means cafeteria. En la are not verbs. En is a preposition and la is an article. So, en and the. Comes is a verb, which means to eat, which means you eat. So, ¿por qué no comes? Why don't you eat? En la cafetería. Question mark at the end. ¿Por qué no comes en la cafetería? Why don't you eat in the cafeteria? ¿Por qué no comes en la cafetería? So question word first, then negative word, then the verb, and then the rest of the sentence. To answer the question, use these words. So you have dinero, which means money, tengo, which means I have, por qué, one word, por qué, which means because, and no, which means don't or doesn't. So, if you're asking a question that asks por qué, like why, two words with the accent mark, you answer because, porque. No goes before the verb, no. And then the verb tengo. And then the rest of the sentence, dinero, which is money. ¿Por qué no tengo dinero? Because I don't have money. In here you have these words, and you know it's gonna be a question that you have to ask. So let's start with the question mark in the beginning. Now, notice that none of these words are question words. They don't have accent marks, and you don't recognize any of them as a question word because they're not. So we have para, which is for, padres, which is parents, puerta, which is door, abres, which is the conjugation of the verb abrir in you open, tú abres, tú, which is the pronoun you informal, tus, which is the possessive pronoun your, and la, which is the. So normally you would start with a question word, but since we don't have one, we have to start with the verb. So in this case, the verb is abres, so abres, and then after the verb, you can use the subject pronoun, which in this case is tú. Abres tú. Do you open? Abres tú. La puerta, the door. Para, for. Tus, your. Padres, parents. Question mark at the end. Abres tú la puerta para tus padres? So the verb comes first, and then the subject pronoun, and then the rest of the sentence. So do you open the door for your parents? Now let's say you want to make that question negative. So instead of asking, ¿abres tú la puerta para tus padres? Do you open the door for your parents? You want to ask, don't you open the door for your parents? All you have to do here is just to make this question negative, is just put the no in front of the verb. So then you would say, no abres tú la puerta para tus padres. So you just put the no in front of the verb, and that makes the sentence negative. So no abres tú la puerta para tus padres. And the way you would answer that, whether it is positive or negative, if it's positive, you say sí, yes, yo, I, abro la puerta para mis padres. Yes, I open the door for my parents. Sí, yo abro la puerta para mis padres. Muchas gracias. Chao.